So shall we begin? I think so. Well, welcome everyone. Great to see you here. I think I'm looking around these lovely faces here. I think I know many of you. Those of you who are new, that's great too. My name's Katherine Weare, and I have the honour of being the curator of these webcast series. And you've tuned in, as you might say, to the webinar that follows the second series. The first series was looking at principles and foundations. And this second series, we called it the Rocky Road to Implementation, where we were looking at what happens in practice when we try and make this actually work in schools and universities. And we have 7 presentations in all in the series by some of the people who are at the cutting edge of this work in Europe. So we're delighted to be here. But before I go any further, I'd like to just say hello to and introduce Gabor, who you may know, you may not. He's our wonderful new MD, and we're very excited about that and thrilled to have him here. It's very kind of him so early on in his tenure to make the time to be here. And I know, and education is something that has fascinated him. I found him very helpful when we were attempting to make some bids to the European Union, and his level of knowledge and understanding about education was exceptional. And I know he's very interested in developing this work within Mind and Life Europe. So over to you, Gabor.
Thank you so much, Katherine. I would also like to welcome everyone here in this Q&A session around the implementation of contemplative education and the rocky road to implementation. And I may share some few experiences myself in my introduction. I live in Hungary, just next to Budapest, and originally I'm a philosopher and linguist, and I've started teaching philosophy and religious studies at Dharma Gate Buddhist College in 1996. This is a state-funded, state-accredited Buddhist university, the only one of such type in Europe. So I learned the challenges and the difficulties of implementing contemplative education on the ground in this particular college since the mid-90s. And I became rector of the college in 2005 and was rector for a few years when I moved to management in general and became manager of Hungarian socially responsible and sensitive enterprises, working with a philanthropist businessman that time in Hungary for a few years, and then also later on managing international initiatives in the field of values-based leadership and even Buddhist organizations in Taiwan, for example. So all these years in management over the last 15 years, I may say, has created a fascinating experience and a landscape of challenges also and opportunities for me to discover and learn, and also now apply in my current role as the new managing director at Mind and Life Europe, which I have been member of since 2016. Participating in association meetings, gatherings, strategy development meetings. And it's a real honor and privilege to join this wonderful initiative and group of people. As you can see from my background, I'm very much keen on education. I think education understood in a very wide sense, not only teaching in school as such, but education as a whole life, long learning process for human individuals and communities and people and even cultures and nations and humanity as such as a whole. I still apply these principles in my current work. Besides MLE, I'm still working at the university where I went back in 2019 and seeing the current challenges of education, especially in higher education, but also in primary schools and high schools in my country. So I'm really keen and happy to be part of this community today and learn from you and have exchange with you all on your experiences, especially why it is a rocky road to implement all these great ideas around contemplative education, and how it is a rocky road. And what we see in the current practices of WARS as challenges, as difficulties, but also as promises to go forward in this particular field of activity. So I hope that this work of WARS in the field of education will be emphasized more in the work of Mind and Life Europe as well, and in our community as well in the near future. And I'm really looking forward to working with you all.
Great. Thank you, Gabor. Excellent. And just to flag up for everyone, this is being recorded so that it can be on the web, and people who aren't able to be here, I hope everyone's okay with that. And shout if you're not. I'm not sure what we'll do about it, but that's what we're doing. And we're hoping that it goes on between an hour and an hour and a quarter. I know one of you, Odile, has to leave, and we understand that. But now, if you have questions as we go that occur to you, pop them in the chat. I think we'll wait till everybody has done their presentation, or their short resume of their presentation, before we take Q&A, but do put your questions in as they occur to you. So the format for this is that each of the speakers is going to have 3 minutes to summarize what was said in their presentation. I did 2, so I think I get 5.5 minutes. And essentially, some of us were representing particular programs, and those 3 are going to go first. One of us is talking about the principles, Nimrod, of the whole school approach. And then Caroline's talking about higher education. So that's the shape of the thing. And Salla has nobly offered to go first. So Salla, if you'd like to chat to us about what the 15-20 minute presentation that everyone here will find on the web, give us the bullet points from that, if you would.
Katherine, and good evening, everyone. So nice to be here with you all. I'm Salla-Maarit Volanen from Finland, Helsinki, and I'm a leader of Finnish Healthy Learning Mind Research and Implementation Project. And in the video, I presented the Healthy Learning Mind project, which started in 2011 here in Finland at the University of Helsinki and at the Folkhälsan Research Center. And it all started as a research. And in that research project, we compare the effectiveness of 8-week mindfulness-based British school program called .B with standard relaxation program and teaching as usual against several health outcomes among 3,500 12 to 15-year-olds in school context. And in 2016, we received a grant from the Ministry of Social Affairs and Health for the implementation of mindfulness practices into Finnish schools. And this was the start of our implementation project. And we started to create and tailor a mindfulness-based well-being training for the Finnish educators, teachers, and early childhood educators, since we realized while working with teachers during the research project that we had to start the training from teachers, from the adults, not from the students. And also we had to start the building of the teacher training from scratch, since .B was not applicable in Finnish school context. And since we wanted to create something that was easily scalable, easily accessible to all, we started our work by comparing 3 different kind of ways to train the teachers. And even though our 8-week face-to-face training did get the best points from our pilot study researchers, which was expected, our 8-week web-based training got 8.2 points out of 10, and the teachers seemed to be very happy with that too. So at the end of 2018, we started the implementation here in Finland by training teachers online. And the practice has shown us that training also the leaders in the field of education may promote the implementation and instilling of these skills into educational organizations. The teachers are sometimes left very alone in their work organizations if there are no like-minded people in their workplaces. So Therefore, we created a tailored mindfulness-based web training for leaders in education in 2020. And also I spoke about the lessons learned during these 10 years, and referring to that, the importance of collaboration with several stakeholders. For example, here in Finland, the Ministry of Social Affairs and Health and Finnish National Agency for Education have been very important partners for us when it comes to the practical implementation of these skills in school context. And also and foremost, collaboration with teachers and early childhood educators, leaders, with those people to whom we make these well-being programs has proven to be very, very important. And also I would like to add the collaboration with media, since that has proven to be important here in Finland since 2011 as we started. Mindfulness hadn't landed here, so very few knew what it was. So coming in by talking about research and positive results has increased the positive interest towards these skills among Finnish people in general. And I'm also convinced that it has helped with us receiving the funding. But of course, the work is slow. Up to date, we have trained 400 teachers, even though we do it online. It's slow and it takes some resources, and now the practical implementation and the teacher trainings are today organized by a not-for-profit organization titled also Healthy Learning Mind, and it operates separately from University of Helsinki and Folkhälsa Research Center, in which organizations I conduct the research work. And this, of course, makes our practical work a bit more challenging when it comes to the fundraising and resources in general. And I'm leader of this non-profit organization as well. So I think this was my 3 minutes. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer later to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Salla. Fascinating, very, very interesting lessons, I think, for all kinds of other countries. And particularly, I think, in the COVID crisis, the online issue may be something that intrigues people, how you do that with quality and how you got such a high ranking for that. It's really quite exceptional. So thank you. Okay, Claire Kelly, hiding here. Claire, I'll let you introduce yourself, Claire, if I may, but we're, as with all of our speakers, we're very privileged to have you representing the very well-known Mindfulness in Schools programme, which Salla's already mentioned has formed the basis of the work that happened in Finland. Over to you, Claire.
Thanks, Katherine. Can you hear me okay? My headphones are a bit new and I'm a little bit anxious about them, but I'm okay. Yes, thank you. So I'm here representing Mindfulness in Schools project. We're a UK charity. We started in 2009 and we kind of broadened out our training from 2011. And really my talk was about a few things really. How you introduce mindfulness into an education system that on the surface appears to be a bit countercultural to mindfulness, and how you work with that, and the lessons we've learned about intention and what really matters, what is the hub of what we're doing. So just briefly, Mindfulness in Schools project was started off by 3 classroom teachers who also happen to be mindfulness practitioners, and were very, very passionate about bringing mindfulness into the classroom. So we are very schooly, if you like. We kind of work with the idea that if you're going to bring mindfulness into a traditional school setting, it has to be in a way that is sufficiently familiar that they don't immediately reject it. And you've also got to work not just with the students to bring them on board, but also those responsible for school budgets, those responsible for organising a timetable, and then obviously having people on the ground, teachers on the ground and school staff who are driving the initiative there. So that's been our model really. We started off developing .B, which Salla mentioned, which is our teenage curriculum, and then kind of haphazardly worked our way through development of different materials and different curricula based on what people were asking for. So we've always been a little bit, until very recently, we've been a little bit reactive rather than proactive. People enjoyed teaching.be, which started off as 8 lessons, has now evolved into 14 and is developing still further into 18, spiraling through across year groups. After that came Pawsby, which was the primary school curriculum. After that was the 8-week program for school staff wellbeing. And suddenly we thought we're doing this the wrong way around, because actually what we say is if you want to teach mindfulness to young people, start with the staff. And it sounds like that's going to be a theme that we hear a lot this evening. And from there, we've developed all kinds of other things, a school mindfulness lead program, online live training for teachers for their own wellbeing, a transitions program for 9 to 14-year-olds, and then most recently, school mindfulness pathway, which is aimed to hold the hands of people who are trying to embed mindfulness in a school setting from absolute first principles right the way through to as close as I think you can ever get having mindfulness embedded in a traditional school culture. So what have we learned? We've learned that you have to work skillfully, getting a balance between what's at the heart of mindfulness and meditative traditions and practices, keeping hold of that whilst also navigating your way around things like, classrooms of 30 students, and all of our materials are designed to be taught to large groups of school students in a traditional classroom within a timetable. So they may have come from maths or physics or been out running around in the playground, and then they land in your classroom. So it's things like, how are you both a mindfulness teacher and a classroom teacher who can maintain kind of a sense of steadiness in the classroom? And how is it in terms of your own practice to be there teaching something that you're passionate about and seeing them laugh, giggle, poke each other, text under the table? So a lot of our training is around getting that balance between those two things. And I suppose what we've learned, the most important things that we've learned are really to keep a sense of that intention in the rockiness that is teaching anyway in a classroom, but particularly teaching mindfulness in a school context. Just to clear, what is your intention? Why are you here? Is it to have a classroom of 13-year-olds sitting perfectly still and calm and waiting to be enlightened? Or is it just to plant seeds of mindfulness practice and understanding that will support them as they go through their lives? And it's definitely the second of those that we're working with. An importance of community, listening to what people say they need, listening to what teachers are asking for, piloting programs, really researching them carefully, making sure you've got some critical friends who can say, that really doesn't make sense to me. Loads of research, so we actively encourage research, we support it wherever we can, and adapting, as we've seen recently. Things change. We said for a long time we will never promote teaching of mindfulness curricula online. It's counter to everything we believe in. And of course, what are we doing now? We're training teachers online. We're encouraging them within safeguarding contexts to teach their classes online. So we have to adapt. And if we've learned anything from this last year, it's just letting go a little of perhaps what you thought were really core practices and working with what you have, I suppose, is the main message there. So I hope that's enough. Is that all right, Katherine? Have I gone over my time?
Yes, smashing. Thank you. Thank you, Claire. Yes, life has a way of humbling you, doesn't it? Just when you think you know what you're doing, you have to readjust. Thank you, Claire. That was lovely, clear and lively. Bryndís, would you like to tell us about the excellent work you're doing, which bridges the gap, I think, between the programs and this more whole school approach? I know Salla and Claire's programs both use whole school, joined up, integrated approaches too, but Bryndís, I think that's been particularly your focus, so do share.
Yes, thank you, and so nice meeting you all here tonight and sharing my passion with what I'm sure is your passion, that is well-being in schools. But I'm talking from Iceland, and I'm a mindfulness teacher, and I run a mindfulness center here. And it started there, even though now I'm also adjunct at the university. I teach at the Faculty of Education and Diversity, where I teach positive psychology and mindfulness. But this project that I'm going to explain to you here is something that the Directorate of Health approaches me and my colleague Anna Dóra Frostadóttir in 2017 and asked us to make some model of implementation of mindfulness into schools, because they noticed that there were a lot of schools interesting and many were trying out one thing or another, but they needed to have something holistic, and that was built on something that had been already tried out in the world. So we looked at the research and we looked at programs that have been going on in the world, and we came to the idea that it would be very important to have it a holistic approach. So we work with a whole school. So we take 2 years for implementation, and we had the goal to start implementing in 2018, and we start researching at the same time. So no time for practicing. So one of the learning things we learned is that you should implement first and then do the research after you have been through some of the years with this. But anyway, we have learned a lot for these 2 years. And so we work with 3 schools that are implementing mindfulness, 3 elementary schools, and they do it from 6 to 16. And then we have 2 comparing schools. And we are now starting to look at the data, and we have some good results, but we also want to do some deeper research. So we are doing both the quantitative and qualitative research. So we are starting the qualitative one now. And what we have learned is that there are a lot of benefits for the schools to implement it, very, very much for the teachers. And I totally agree that this is a very important thing to start with, to go with the teacher. And even if you don't teach the teachers to teach students, then it would make some difference in the school. It just affects the school cultures. If the teachers and the staff is doing fine, that goes to the students. So we have learned on this 3 years that we have been in this journey, that this is a journey and this takes time. And I think it's very important for the school to have active administrators. And what we have built into our model is that we need to have a team within the school with support, so that the school can adapt this to their school culture. So in these 3 schools, they are not doing it exactly the same way, because it's very important, like Claire said, to be true to the main things in the mindfulness. So we don't do it mindfulness, or so to say. So so it takes time, and I think it's just something that with time floats into the school culture. And we emphasize that it should be, the one who is teaching math can do a mindfulness exercise with the kids, and as well as the English teacher and the life skills teachers. And we have 3 curriculums that are built into this, one for the youngest, and then the middle and the oldest ones. And that is the present and the youth mindfulness, and then one curriculum I developed myself. But I think that learning from this model we built is that you can use any curriculums at all, just adapt it to them. But the main things are like I said, the team to have for the school to have professional support while they are implementing. But the main goal is that after these 2 years, the school faculty has it in their bones, or so to say, to keep going to nurturing mindfulness in the future. And I think it's very important to create opportunities for teachers to support each other, to have some groups within the schools and have it visible in the schools, so make let the kids and do something that goes up to the floors, up to the walls, or down on the floors. Actually, one made steps around the corridors to remind them of being mindful in their walking. So we have seen that in many different ways flourishing. And maybe one thing to add at the end is that it's very important to include the parents. And that is something that we want to emphasize more in the future. We have given them a short course, but we would like to give them more like an 8-week course, like we give to the staff and the students. So briefly around my work in Iceland.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Bryndís. Very, very clear, and lovely how the themes are reverberating through the different talks. I would encourage anyone listening to start to think about some questions. We've got a few coming up already, and that would be great. Nimrod, who is Professor Holism, I think you are one of the leading lights in thinking in a systems-based, holistic, joined-up way with your background in medicine and now in education. So really looking forward to hearing that. Just remind people, if you want to really be able to focus on the speaker, pop your view perhaps into speaker view. I think you'll get a better quality experience when you're actually looking more close up at the person talking. Thank you.
So hello, good evening, at least here it's evening. This is Nimrod, Israel. In the short time that I can only give you a glimpse of a few bullets. One is when we started Israel Mindfulness in School, it was 1998, and we didn't have anyone to compare notes with. And so there was no manuals yet, no research yet, and we had to improvise. It was positive and negative, though it wasn't researched, which was good and bad. Research came 10 years later when we began to research, or we tried to research what we have done. Because we had to sort of invent the wheel, we did start in a school that opened the gates, and then more and more schools opened their gates. The way we implemented the whole school approach was once a week for the whole year after year, which in Israel is 6 years. So a child at the age of 6 is receiving once a week of mindfulness-based 45 minutes, we'll discuss in a second, and that keep on going, not for 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 15 weeks, but for over 30 weeks, 1 year, and then next grade and next grade and next grade and next grade. So if you just do a short calculation, if we started just to make it easy, that instead of 98, let's take 2000, and now it's 20 years later, just to make numbers easy, it takes six years to the 6 years old to graduate. So by now we have 15 cycles of graduates that have had mindfulness for 6 years, once a week. Many of them would have it more than once a week because it would sneak into school culture. Before exam, 5 minutes. Schoolyard something, 10 minutes. Before a show, whole school show with the parents, 3 minutes, etc., etc. The integration that we chose was integration of what I call in my mind classical mindfulness, which is more static, and then movement-based mindfulness, like mindful yoga, etc., and significant use of imagery-based language. We use it anyway. Thich Nhat Hanh is using it, and many are using it, but I think we amplified it. And because we've had 45 minutes once a week for a whole year, we didn't have to rush. And we could juggle the components. And only in retrospect, I figured that we have about 5 major components in our pedagogy. And one is what we say, what we explain, how we motivate, what we rationalize, etc. And then is the experiences, opportunities that we are creating, hopefully hoping for collaboration. And then we have the exploration and reflection and the ability of children to write about it or to express it in a non-verbal way, drawings. And then we have the opportunity to discuss it in a circle. And then we hope for home application or in-school application out of the official 45 minutes. and incorporation of parents, which was not easy in Israel. Parents are too busy. So we did have a little success, but not a major success. We also, beyond the original program started under the umbrella of the Israel Center for Mind-Body Medicine, which was more like a postgraduate training for therapists in the context of Buddhist psychology and mind-body psychotherapies, and the Israel Ministry of Education and the Health Promoting School. Health Promoting School is obviously promoting health, and mindfulness is promoting mind-body health, wellness, resiliency, social intelligence, emotional intelligence. So it made a lot of sense to the ministry then, 22 years ago, to initiate a pilot program, one school, and then more and more schools came. Just to close the 22 years experience, we were developing and then we had to stop developing. And only a few schools are by now left. There are many things to say about why is that, but now we have updated programs, which we part of even part of these seminars, you will hear or heard maybe more programs now happening in Israel by similar models, but different models. And the privilege is we have, as we see now on the screen, so many different models, unlike MBSR and BCT, which is quite boxed and squeezed in for good therapeutic reasons. And in mindfulness, we have some multiplicity upon multiplicity of options and models. And that's how we can explore and learn and teach each other and learn from each other and have more choice for each child, each school, each country, each location, et cetera, et cetera. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nimrod. Fascinating. You're doing wonderful work in Israel. I think really very groundbreaking and quite unlike in some ways some of the things that are happening in other parts of Europe. So there's a lot to say there. Caroline, would you like to share with us what's happening in higher education? Caroline runs a network on contemplative pedagogy and knows a great deal about how this works in higher education. So we're delighted to have you here.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much, everyone. It's been so interesting to hear about what's going on in schools and just reflect on the similarities and differences. So in my, so I work at the University of Essex as a lecturer in the School of Health and Social Care. And I came across the idea of contemplative pedagogy back in 2014. And in my talk, I really just talk briefly about what contemplative pedagogy is. It's a slightly broader idea, very related to contemplative education, that under which mindfulness sits as a very important component, but it might be slightly broader than just mindfulness on its own. Although, of course, how we define all these concepts is a whole other evening, or a whole other life's work, to be honest. So. And what contemplative pedagogy does is it finds ways of incorporating first-person approaches into teaching and learning. And in my mind, acts as a way of rebalancing education from this kind of focus on the objective external world that we like to tell young people a lot about, and reconnect them to their internal subjective lived experience. And so obviously there's lots of different ways of doing that, and mindfulness is one of them. And so within higher education, how this is manifesting is incredibly diverse and incredibly difficult to kind of capture. I think where contemplative pedagogy in higher education is interesting is that it's coming very much from the idea of mindfulness as education, this idea that we can incorporate mindfulness practice, contemplative practice, into the ways that we teach our standard curriculum. So it's not the idea of having models of mindfulness and mindfulness interventions, but actually really integrating the learning and the curriculum with contemplative practice. But of course, mindfulness in education is also an important model for higher education. And we have lots of different mindfulness interventions that students and staff can access with a well-being focus. But my particular interest is around really curriculum and how we help people learn their subjects. And so the extent to this is that this is happening is very, and this really relates to what's been said already. It really does relate to finding individual lecturers with individual passions and interests. And what I'm finding is through the Contemplative Pedagogy Network and now through the Contemplative Education community, that finding other educators that are interested and are using this in their teaching and learning is just hugely motivating for me, and is giving me lots of sort of ideas, which is great. But one of the things that we don't really know is how many people are kind of using it, the ways that they're using it. So when I'm listening to people talking about different programs and things, education in the early years has a much more structured approach than I think we have in higher education. But of course, this is, and in another way, it's leading to lots of creativity, and people are really using it within their own disciplines in a variety of ways. And I find that really, really encouraging. I think, so where things are a bit rocky in higher education is, again, the culture of education in higher education is very, almost runs against the grain of contemplative practice. A huge sort of focus on performance, both for staff and students, a focus on employability, on economic return. There doesn't sometimes feel like there's a lot of space for values, meaning, thinking, connecting, those things that we really value within this community. And also I think that the kind of the very varied way that contemplative pedagogy is developing and emerging in higher education means that it's incredibly difficult to research. It's very difficult to kind of pin it down enough. So if anyone's making progress with this, please let me know, because I think this is what we really need to do more of in contemplative pedagogy. And when I'm looking at how you guys are evaluating in schools, I really think that that's a model that we need to start to develop more in higher education that we haven't done as much of. So I think I'm going to stop there, but yeah, loads more I could say. So yeah, thanks very much for having me.
Thank you, Caroline. Good, excellent, fascinating. The parallels, I think, are very interesting, but also the differences, as you say, so much about individual enthusiasm. Now, I'm going to talk very briefly, I think, about what's contained in the talks that I did. I had the opportunity, or the millstone, I'm not sure which, of having two slots. And the one I'll talk about first is the one that connects with what with the whole school approach that Bryndís and Nimrod have been talking about. In a previous life, I was Mrs. Whole School, Mrs. Whole Joined Up approach. That's what I was known for. I wrote about this and was very enthused about this. And it's obviously a very attractive idea, and we use this notion of whole school, whole university very freely. We talk about systems approaches, or the, you know, if we're looking at the psychology, we talk about the work of Ian McGilchrist and his left brain, right brain, trying to balance the two. This need to balance the holistic approach and looking at the parts and trying to get that balance. If we're interested in the origins of this work, obviously a Buddhist approach is one that very much believes that everything is related to everything else, dependent origination. So there's all that spiritual background there. And not just Buddhism, of course. Aristotle actually said education of the mind without education of the heart is no education at all. So it's not just a Buddhist approach. We've got the whole tradition of the whole child and that work. And Nimrod mentioned the health promoting school approach, which I was involved in for quite a while. The World Health Organization made very clear how important settings are when we're understanding health, and how we don't just look at individuals, we look at the contexts and the environments we create, and that's the level we work at. And of course, the neuroscience emphasizes the holistic approach. I was pleased to see a nice quote from the most recent research on neuroscience, which said the complex mental state of mindfulness is likely to be supported by large-scale brain networks. So we've rather stopped atomizing, you know, this bit works that way and that bit works that way. So the neuroscience is bringing all this together. So it sounds very much as if a holistic approach is on the side of the angels, but rocky road. What's been found, and including in the work I did, that it's not easy. You can't just label things whole school or whole university and it all works. And the devil's in the detail. And we found that often when holistic approaches were evaluated in a hard-nosed way, they weren't making the difference that they were supposed to make. And that was quite alarming. and that you have to implement them well. And that leads to the essence of the second talk I gave, which I'll just, excuse me, look at my notes here. I haven't got that good a memory really, which is looking at implementation. And what is it that we know about what makes for effective implementation? Because unless we do this well, it's not going to work. Excuse me a minute while I find the right. Okay, yes, good. As always, one's notes go missing the minute you need them. So what we found in terms of implementing mindfulness-based approaches, and I'm talking here on the basis of practice and also on doing a recent review of the evidence base for some guidance I've just written on implementing mindfulness in schools, is that there's certain things to get very, very right. The first one is to be absolutely clear about what it is that you're trying to introduce. And what we know is there is such a lot of confusion about what mindfulness means, about what contemplative education means. I mean, we ourselves debate this very happily, but when you get down to the level of university lecturers or classroom teachers, they can be completely muddled about what we're doing, and often seize on to rather unfortunate ideas like, well, it's all about being blissful. It's all about being, you know, having no stress. It's about emptying the mind. It's, you know, and this, that people grab this holy grail, this is going to transform my life by helping me be instantly calm. And when, of course, they find that this doesn't work for themselves or for their students, they go off the whole idea. So we need to be very clear with people that this is not about eternal bliss. This is about relating to your experience in a different way. This is about relating to the self and understanding the self, including the darker sides of the self, looking at difficult experiences, neutral experiences, as well as blissful experiences. And the blissful ones can be a bit elusive. So we mustn't oversell mindfulness or contemplative approaches. And I think some of the evidence has oversold it and made out that we've got this all sussed when we don't really. So we do need to explain this as a rocky road. We need to make sure that the terrain we're trying to introduce this into is ready for it. There's no point in wasting our energies where the social conditions aren't right, where the educational conditions aren't right, and where if you try and introduce it too early, it gets shifted into being something different if you're not careful. I've even seen examples of it being used to discipline kids. You know, we'll have that instead of exclusion. We'll teach them mindfulness quite forcefully, and that really is not the idea. So you've got to be very careful where you introduce it. You usually need a symbiosis between a top-down and a bottom-up approach. Neither one is right. If you just rely on the politicians and the policymakers to dump this on schools and universities, they will reject it. But if you wait for schools and universities to develop it themselves, we'll wait forever, because it takes, and we're not learning from one another. So you really need both sides to come together. And what we need to do to sustain this work, I think, is to start shifting from what we've alluded to already, the very medical model of mindfulness and the contemplative, you know, mindfulness in education, it's been called, and need to be thinking of mindfulness as education, the lovely work that Caroline's doing, that Nimrod's and others are doing, linking this with teaching and learning in the deepest sense. I don't mean just passing tests and exams and so on, but actually linking this with the teaching and learning curriculum as well as with the mental health curriculum. And there's plenty else I could say, but I won't. There's more detail in my talk. But I think the most important one is back to this starting with ourselves as educators, then on to helping teachers develop authentic mindfulness themselves, taking this slowly so that we embody what we're trying to do. You can't push this through, you can't develop it too quickly, or it transmutes itself into being something different. So we have got to take this pretty slowly and embody what we preach, which is patience, I think, and not try and go too fast. That's been our experience. And if you can get that right, you've got some hope some of the time of being slightly effective. So that I think that summarizes what I wanted to say. Now we've got a couple of questions already. Do you want to share this now, Gabor?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Katherine, and thank you everyone for your summaries of your talks. We see two questions here. One from Brigitte Engenmann, and this is for Bryndís. I heard you say you learned that it makes sense to start research once you are a few years into the program. Correct? Can you elaborate on why? And actually, we heard something similar from Nimrod too, that research was done later along the route. So why is that?
I think it's very important that, and it links to what Katherine said about how we implement, and that we are very careful about how we implement, because there are a lot of things that you need to be aware of within the implementation. So there are a lot of things to focus on. And for one thing is that if you want to measure the impact on the students and their health and well-being, you need to have qualified teachers that have them within their bones. And like Katherine said, it's so important to start by yourself, start the journey in your own inner life, and that takes time. So I think that given that, but it seems like it's also because this all costs money and time is valuable, and I think it's, at least it is in Iceland, we really want to see some results quite fast, and so I think that we did that. We didn't hesitate when we started. Oh, yes, of course, because we know it's very important to research, and it's very important, but it's also important to give time for development and to just have it settling in. And you don't have the, for one, it is very difficult to measure, like Caroline mentioned. It's just, how can we measure, and how do we know when this will flourish within the person, and how will they benefit from it, and when will they benefit from it? So it's there are so many things around that. So I think that in the future we will give more time for that to just settling in and then measure. But but it was surprising what we can see in the numbers, although we did it this way. So but I think it's very important to give the implementation time to to have it settled in.
When you say surprising, in what sense you mean surprising?
Well, for the teachers, it has been very helpful by relating to stress in self-efficacy in work life, in the teaching. It has been doing self-compassion has been amazingly. So what do we? I'm missing the word for that, but yeah. So it has impact a lot, and we have so many sunshine stories around the students too. So yeah, we know that it has a very positive impact, but I'm sure that if we would give it more time and work from the learning process that we have been through now, we will do it differently now that we start with the comparison schools and other schools. We are working with other schools that are doing the research, and it's just like also in more relaxed way when you are not having the research like here. So it's a bit of a pressure to have, oh, we have to show it's great, and we don't want to be there, because yes, it can have a very positive impact, and I'm sure of that. But yeah, so it's important to give it time, to give you time and focus on the implementation. Thank
you, Bryndís. Maybe Caroline or Nimrod can add something to that. And I also see Christina, do I pronounce your name well? Another question related to that. Maybe you can pose your question after Caroline.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I really hear what Bryndís is saying about allowing time to settle. But I think that there's a question there around what we want the research to do. So I do think that there are sort of approaches to research, like participatory research, more action research models, that actually might be appropriate for being integrated from the very beginning, because they're not so much about effectiveness, about working out whether something works, but they can provide some very useful tools to help explore that process of implementation. So I think that there are different ways of looking at research. It doesn't necessarily have to be about effectiveness. And I just wanted to kind of, just to share that, because I think that there's lots of different ways that research might be supportive, as well as not just being kind of a diagnostic kind of tool, if you see what I mean. Yeah.
Thank you, Caroline. Yes, Nimrod, please. You also referred to this issue in your
in the context of research. We didn't start with research because we didn't even thought about research. It was not on the mind at all. Our mind was, oh, someone is inviting us. Let's integrate something that makes sense. We were very naive in a very positive sense, and we had beginner's luck. So that's just one point. Second point is from Albert Einstein, and I like that quote of his: not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. And that's one of the problems with research. I began over the years a big fan of interviewing children, very unscientific, but very human, just to speak to the children and see not what did we teach or what did we measure, but what do they say about us and what they have learned and gained and remember and used in a useful way. I agree with Bryndís very much that research can be great, and it can be a great hustle in the field. And in medicine, it's also known that when obviously every medication is being researched, and usually the rule of thumb in medicine, the medication works best when it's beginning to be implemented, and slowly its influence is for unknown reasons, usually many times, not always, many times, being reduced. And that's another danger. When we do research, it will be useful, and the usefulness may be reduced once the research is out of the system. And the last, I agree with, I think it was Caroline that said that research doesn't need to be research. We need to know what are we doing and how are we being perceived, and that's not exactly named by research, but it's a follow-up, ongoing inquiry, which is the word we use, mindful inquiry of the mindful language that we are trying to implement. And that's very useful, extremely useful. And we can be more and more skillful in how to do it among teachers and among children.
Thank you, Nimrod. Now maybe Christina, you can ask your question so that we hear other voices in the room as well, not only me reading the questions.
Actually, I have second questions. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, okay. We can hear you.
Yeah, I'm a teacher by myself, and I'm trying to implement it in the moment. So I get a group now together to get started. And I had very positive experiences with the students in the class to keep them calm, safe. You know, they get open-minded, they get compassion. And with this compassion, with this energy, they could really set goals for this hour. And they're really open and they get calmer. And we are Burning Point School, so it's a very aggressive school. So when they come into the classroom, it's completely different than in I don't know. It's difficult. It's challenging. Yeah. But to get the rest on board, who's only thinking, I mean, the other teachers, they don't see the result that if a student can learn to breathe and calm down, the polyvagal theory said that they come down from the hyperarousal and down, they can calm, and then they can get connected. And this is the point where we want to come, that they can start learning. So for me, it would be interesting to have research questions, because then I can get the other teachers on board, because they only ask, what is the profit? How can I be more quick with my students to come to the subject? we have no extra hours for this. The curriculum is already so full, but I can say from my experience, we have better results, and it's a Trojan horse, I think so, yeah, to get this inside, because it has a big influence on the well-being of all the students. So also when I agree with Katherine when she says it is not important only to look for the outcome, I think it's a way to show that it is very successful also for the rest of the life of the students. So I would like to ask you if you have any research questions so that we maybe could use them.
Thank you. I also see other questions raised here by Bruce and by Annie. Maybe Bruce, your question is really interesting. Can you share it, or do you want me to read it, or does everyone see it?
Yes, please go ahead and read it as it is, and if you want me to comment further on it after it's been answered, I will.
Thank you. So the question is really, as we prepare youngsters to engage with their experience in a different way, how is society being prepared not to reject young adults with a different worldview to that which exists presently in society? Are we adults ready to allow them to influence their own futures? Who would like to respond to that? Katherine.
Hello, Bruce. I might have known it would be you asking the difficult question.
Lovely to see you again.
I know, lovely to see you too. It's in a sense, it's slightly rhetorical question, I think, Bruce. Really, I'm not quite sure who society is, but I think your question at the end about are we ready to allow them to influence their own futures is a really important one. How do we try to perhaps bridge this generation gap between those of us who are getting older and for whom life is not as difficult and who are not going to suffer quite as much from the crises that are affecting our planet? What's it like to be a young person nowadays, and that level of anger perhaps and anxiety that they have, which is hard sometimes for older people to relate to. I think this is a really important question. How do the generations work together? And I guess I would say that one of the things I appreciate about contemplative approaches is that they are approaches that are used by all age groups, that this understanding of the self and wisdom and building empathy and compassion are foundational things that run right through and are not age dependent. So I guess, without being too banal, the more that we can work at all levels to introduce contemplative and mindfulness based approaches in adult education. We haven't talked about that at all yet, but how do we integrate this with education for life, in higher education and so on? The more that we can come together as a society, young and old, to really make this work. So I think the question you're asking, Bruce, I think for me builds towards this need for multi-generational contemplative education.
Claire, yes.
I think that was really the point I was trying to make, that whilst we focus on introducing this in education, in order to give the tools to our children to change the way that they approach life, we also have to prepare society at the same time for a generation or generations that will come through with a different worldview. Now, most of you are too young to remember what it was like for us in the 60s when we came out with a different worldview that we felt that we wanted to take forward, and the resistance that we met from the previous generations. I can see the potential for the same thing happening again here. And that's why it's hugely important that we incorporate the rest of society, not just the schools, not just the educators, but the parents, society, and the politicians, that, as was said earlier, that we have both a top-down and a bottom-up approach to this, so that we can give our children the tools, and especially in the pre-teens, it's very important that they should go through the teenage growth spurt with the tools to relate to their changing environment in a more stable, self-regulated way. And if they do come through that with a different way of thinking, I think we have to be prepared for generations coming through who want to take their own future forward. And we have to be prepared to encourage them. So that was really the point I was trying to make. And I think, Katherine, you've agreed with me on that. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Bruce. Claire wanted to add something to what Katherine said.
Thank you. Yeah, just what's interesting actually for me is that both Christine and Bruce's questions or comments came together in that what we're seeing more and more, where mindfulness is working in a schools and youth context, is where the young people begin to own it. So it's not something that's just delivered to them, or taught to them, and it links in with Christine's work as well. Just that they start to own it. They want to do it. They want to teach it to their parents. They want to teach it to other teachers who haven't heard about it. They want to stand up in assemblies and teach the whole school about it. They want to lead practices at lunchtime clubs. And when that starts to happen, they then start campaigning, you know, and we've seen this happen on a meta scale, haven't we? The voice of youth actually making change. Greta Thunberg, Malala Yousafzai, they're all there making change. And maybe I'm being overly optimistic, but I think we're seeing a real change happening that means young people are getting more engaged in what really matters to them and voicing it. And on a really small scale in the schools context, if you can get the young people you're working with to own their practice and then campaign, you know, I've seen students march up to the headmaster's office, bang on the door and say, you have to put this in the curriculum. And he did, because he couldn't argue with them. They had all the evidence there and they led him in a practice. And so it's about the real bottom-up stuff, you know, get the students to own it and then get them to approach the people who have the power. That's how you'll make change, I think.
Actually, I see three more practical suggestions here in the chat stream. One was that we would probably need to publish a book on this topic to collect all the experiences and share it with a wider public. That was Annie's recommendation. The second was Christina's point on the need for questionnaires. So if we have any concrete practice or any concrete examples of good questionnaires, it would be nice to collect them and even maybe research them a little bit or create a comprehensive type that we can then share with educators working in situations that we heard from Christina. And the third layer of more practical questions was Caroline's. Is there funding for such efforts in various circumstances or situations or countries even? So I just wanted to acknowledge Annie's point and Christine's point and Caroline's question. So book to publicize, questionnaire to help people working, and then funding. What's your view on that? Caroline? Sorry, Katherine?
I was going to actually suggest, rather, I'm dumping you in it a bit, Claire, but I wonder, you've been thinking a lot about funding in the UK, and you know, as somebody who's managing one of the best known programs, I know this has been quite a bugbear for you, so I wondered if you've got particular commentary on that. I thought you might be an excellent person to answer that one.
Well, I wish I had the perfect answer, but I don't. People have to get very creative. And again, this is partly because people, when you approach for funding, they often don't really understand what it is you're asking to do. They don't fundamentally understand. So it's about educating people before asking them for money. In a schools context here in the UK, where there is, as you know, there's zero money, people have used other forms of funding that kind of inform. So rather than it being, for example, money that's put towards social and emotional learning, which doesn't exist, they might use money for sports equipment. and increasingly actually in schools we're seeing PE departments, sports departments leading the way with this kind of work. We're also looking at things like, you know, taking local businesses who will part fund something because they happen to know that their child's school is struggling and that mental health in the school is not so great. So it's, you know, just getting really creative with funding. But until people recognize that this is not just a handy add-on, that it's actually fundamental to how we teach and how we are. And it's really exciting to hear about your work, Caroline, in that respect, you know, and that it's education that really means something rather than something they have to remember, regurgitate in an exam and then forget. I know I'm dismissing all education out of hand here, but that's sometimes how it feels at the moment. So sorry, I wish I had a magic answer about funding.
Katherine.
Just to make a couple of points, which is that in the UK, I've been involved in writing a document recently on implementing mindfulness in schools, in which we're trying to make the case for why this is so important. And there's 3 areas that we're emphasising, which I think may help with politicians and policymakers. One is that it is foundational, that this is not a bolt-on extra. It is something that, if you look at the evidence, runs through absolutely everything about school life, about teachers, students, about every aspect of the whole child in the whole school. So that's one thing. So not allow it to become siloed into being a mental health concern. I know we all think mental health should be central, but in some schools it's not. So this is foundational. The second one is that it is essential for teacher effectiveness. And there's really interesting work coming out showing how contemplative and mindfulness-based approaches help teachers be more effective in their core job in the classroom. And as well as being more compassionate and empathic and understanding students and so on, they're actually better at prioritizing, at staying on task, at teaching, you know, the processes, not just the subject, at managing difficult behavior better. And I think if you emphasize that aspect, it will go better. And then finally, as I've said already, this need to integrate it with the core goals of schools and universities, not just to have it as a bolt-on extra. And if we can start to make that kind of approach, rather than always looking to the medical approach or the outcomes-based process, I think we'll have more likelihood of getting funding so that it's clearly core to education, not just a bolt-on extra that disappears when things get tough. And that's certainly the argument that we're bringing the evidence together for in the UK. So, but the evidence is all out there, and this implementation guidance will be published shortly. So go on the Mindful Initiative website in the UK, where we try and bring this argument very strongly together. But it's all out there, so make that case in your school, look at some of the research evidence around teacher effectiveness and why it's foundational.
Thank you, Katherine. Nimrod, do I see you? Yeah, yeah.
Just brief, just I like to get out of the box. So in Bhutan, I've been in Bhutan quite a few times. In Bhutan, it's a whole country approach. It's not a whole school approach. It's a whole country's approach. And it's under the Bhutan policy, the country's policy of GNH, gross national happiness. And when they've had the first election, which was about 12 years ago, the first election, they decided that it should be, if GNH, gross national happiness, is so important, it should begin in education, in schools, in children. And part of the manual, mindfulness is a chapter in the manual. And it was never seriously researched, and it has no components of explanation or inquiry. The main component is 3 to 5 minutes experience opportunity. So the teachers are supposed to guide the children for a few minutes something, as much as they can. Because it was never assessed, even in a non-research way, something to learn, the teachers are not too motivated or enough motivated to do that repetitively. Even though they have a manual with 7 potential scripts that they can read and speak. And again, each country has its own DNA, and each school has its own DNA, and each Ministry of Education has their own DNA, and that keep on changing, because as we know, the world is all the time changing. The policy in Israel is not the policy today. And the ministry is not the same ministry. Unfortunately, it's the same government, but that's a different story. So no politics on this show.
Thank you, Nimrod. I also see Philippa, you asked the question in the chat, are 8 weeks enough? Would you like to elaborate that further? Because you gave some explanation to your question, but I would like to hear your voice too.
Yes, my curiosity is coming from, we have seen from all your speakers that the rocky roads to implementation, and the fact that this is a long-term journey, is not a short-term thing that we are going to fix universities or schools or whatever institution we are working on. And also the importance of being very clear about the intention and what are we doing by implementing mindfulness or other contemplative approaches in education in this case. And so my question is, what do people do? What do they, for instance, when we teach an 8-week program to teachers, each individual teacher in that group is going to make mindfulness something meaningful for him and start his own journey. And what about after that? What is your felt sense, and what is your experience with that? Because I understand the importance of in our Western culture to have 8-week programs and research-based programs. It's important to open the doors, but what has been your experience after that?
Who would like to respond to that? Bryndís?
Yes, I can respond to that, because in my experience, this is just the beginning. The 8 weeks are just the foundation, and it's very important to support the teachers. If we're talking about the teachers, I like to talk about the whole staff group, and to give them opportunity to nurture their mindfulness within the school and have some groups and encouragement to develop it. Because of course we know from the practice ourselves that this is 8 weeks are just the beginning, but they are very important to have at the beginning, but that's just the beginning. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think we need to build it within the culture of the school, and so this is just a part of this long time journey.
Thank you, Bryndís. Anyone else on that point? Was it satisfactory to you, Philippa? Did it answer your point on the longer term process needed?
I think Claire would like to add something.
Claire
Yes, maybe Claire.
But I may regret saying this, given that we started with exactly that, an 8-week program, and I no longer think it is enough. And in a way, I'd quite like us to get to a point where we don't refer to mindfulness as something that happens once a week. I think it needs to be something that is embedded as part of a broader just approach in education. But I know I'm a bit of an idealist, and maybe, you know, the way forward is just to keep on keeping on. But maybe not just see mindfulness as something you do one term and then that's it for the year. And I realize I've just completely contradicted an awful lot of what we do at Mindfulness in Schools Project, but we're changing and developing that. So,
Katherine.
Absolutely, that reinforces what I was saying about getting away from the medical model of mindfulness as an intervention that's kind of comes in a box and you dump it in the school and you measure before and after, and you have a control group and you say this lot are slightly less depressed than that lot. Boom. That's a start. You know, people understand that model, it got it through the door. I think Christine talked about a Trojan horse. I use that image a lot, or a Trojan mole. You know, you get it in that way. But what we're really talking about is infiltrating and affecting hearts and minds and school ethos. And we need to get away from this outcomes evaluation only to look at how it affects how people are, because the basic ethics of mindfulness and contemplative approaches of kindness, compassion, open-mindedness, these are attitudes that should affect the entire organization and everything that happens there, from classrooms to staff rooms to the way policies are managed. And it's not just idealistic, it is starting to happen. We've got some jolly good case studies of that in our implementation document, for example. In the book I did on Happy Teachers Change the World, we had some real life examples of whole school approaches where it was about affecting attitudes and ethos, and people talk to each other differently, the language people use is different, the way they approach one another. So this is really quite core, and I think that's what we need to do. But often it needs to follow on mindfulness as an intervention. You've got to kind of get it through the door that way and not undersell it. I mean, the work that Claire's program's done is brilliant in getting that basic established from which you can then allow the ethos to bloom. And if you don't have that basis, and this is what happened with the whole school approach across Europe, it's too diffuse. If you just go in at the level of ethos, nobody really knows what you're talking about, and it doesn't make much difference. So you've got to have the solid grounding of what you're talking about, from which things can be genuinely to grow in genuine new ways. Otherwise, schools and universities just say, oh, we're doing this already. We already respect people. We already have empathy. So you've got to get both. It's not either or. I think it's both.
Thank you, Katherine. I'm mindful. Yes, Caroline, please.
Sorry, I don't want to take up too much time. I also want a thought that came to my mind was that we're having great conversations here, and that I think that we can also contribute, not just talking about mindfulness in education, but I think our voices also need to start contributing to debates about the value of education, the purpose of education as well, because I think that, you know, this issue of intervention and ethos, I think is really, really important. And of course, they both play a role, and they're complementary. But I do think that there's, I don't know, I feel like there's a level of debate that we need to be involved in as kind of, rather than mindfulness and education people, maybe we could be educational activists or something. I don't know, but there's something about that for me. Yeah, it just comes to mind.
Thank you, Caroline. That's a very important point that we are exploring actually in our Mind and Life community. So how education in a much wider sense can be highlighted and promoted as a cause in itself. With all the elements that you have just referred to, mindfulness as education, but even in a larger sense, because it seems that the crisis and the issues, the challenges that the younger generation will face, and we are already facing, will require a whole new approach to these challenges, and also to education, and how they will tackle with that, and how we can help them build resilience against all the challenges that are present in the moment and going to be present for long, it seems. I'm just mindful of the time here, in the sense that it's 7:20 Central European time. And I wonder if we heard all the questions. There may be some friends of ours who are here from the MLE Friends community who haven't had the chance to ask a question or speak. But I don't want to make those who need to leave wait too long to leave. So if there's anyone who wants to really jump off at this moment, that's fine. Anyone can leave like that. But if you are fine, we would probably continue 5 more minutes to make sure that we heard all the questions. Maybe from Regula, from Wolfgang, even from Brigitta, because we did read your question but haven't heard your voice. Annie, if she is here with some question besides the chat we have been doing, I just want to make sure that we hear everyone's voice and questions. If maybe Regula. Yes, please.
Well, I just want to say thank you very much. I really enjoyed the whole discussion and the issues that came up. I'm from Switzerland, and we just started to evaluate some mindfulness interventions, women that have been doing their interventions in schools for 10, 20 years. And I came and, well, they wanted to evaluate their interventions, and I kind of cooperate with them now. And so it's very interesting to hear the problems or the thoughts about how to do the research, because it's not as straightforward as I thought it would be. So I'm very much at the beginning and learning how there are different modes of doing this research. So thank you very much for everyone.
Thank you, Regula. And I also wanted to acknowledge Annie's request in the chat. She asked whether this discussion will be available for the general public. And I can promise that it will be available, because now it's limited to the MLE Friends subscribers. It will be available after a few months. The whole series, the first series of education, and this one, the second series of education, in the Beyond Confines webcast series that MLE has developed lately. And probably I would just grab the moment here to ask Katherine to share a few words about the upcoming third series, just in a nutshell, the main topic, what that will be about, and who will be the presenters there, so that you all who are here today can continue following this work and the work of our friends.
Yes, thank you, Gabor. Yes, the third series is, we hope, quite exciting. We're looking there at cutting edges and new issues. So we're looking at where this is going. So many of the themes we've talked about here today, Caroline, and your culture change, and putting education at the heart and so on, are all there. We've got some fascinating presentations on the subject of doing no harm, how important it is to avoid doing harm. There's concerns, I know, around trauma and difficulties, and where is this work indicated, and how do we need to take care of people and not be bland about that. So that's an exciting area. The issue about ethics and how we make sure that this work is ethical, and how we make sure that education is responding to the challenges that face humanity, and what is the role of contemplative education in that. So we've got speakers from a variety of programs and approaches. Michael Breedy from Youth Mindfulness, Orleth from Wake Up Schools, talking about the ethical and the doing no harm issues. My brain's gone blank, of course, now I'm asked to remember who I was looking at it. But there are some splendid folks there. Roni Berger talking about work on prejudice and intolerance in Israel, and how using contemplative approaches to overcome that. So there's cutting edge work, but also cutting edge questions to which we have no clear answers yet, but I think they are some of the most exciting areas. So do hope that that you'll tune into the seminars, and that you'll tune into the final webcast. And don't forget to pick up on anything that you may have missed so far. There's some very rich work in all the series so far.
And of course, this series today and this question and answer session will be available for all the MLE friends who didn't have the chance to join today, but will get the notification. And if you want to share in your professional circles or in your community, please do share it, and also invite everyone to join the MLE Friends network that we are developing, so that we can be in regular touch with up-to-date, most cutting-edge issues and questions on the field of neuroscience, philosophy, contemplative science, contemplative education and pedagogy, and all these related areas that we are exploring here. Just wanted to thank you for your interest and curiosity and questions, participation, listening, and to our friends from the CCE, the Contemplative Education Committee, community, that you gave these talks and that you presented their summary today, and that you were here with us, responding to questions, having dialogues with each other, and that you are available to such explorations now and in the future as well. Thank you so much for participating.